The chandeliers at Bellemere Estate cast their soft glow across the marble floors, each crystal droplet catching light like a captured star. Guests murmured in admiration as they took their seats, adjusting velvet shawls and designer ties, sipping champagne and exchanging knowing smiles. It was the wedding of the year in Charleston, maybe the decade, and no one doubted why. Amelia Whitmore was, after all, a name worth watching. She was elegance molded into grace, owner of a boutique empire that grew from a garage sewing machine and a series of heartbreaks. The daughter of a respected local, philanthropist, and a woman known for her garden parties and devastating honesty. And today, dressed in ivory silk embroidered with thousands of hand-sewn beads, Amelia stood at the threshold of a new chapter. At 27, she had already built a life, a name, and she was about to give it all to a man, or so she believed. As the string quartet eased into the first strains of Vivaldi, the aisle stretched out before her like a fairy tale pathway. The scent of roses and peonies hung in the air, mingling with perfume and anticipation. Amelia stood with her hand on her father's arm, smiling through nerves, heart thudding in rhythm with the music. She looked radiant, not in the artificial glow of opulence, but with something softer, quieter. A hopefulness, because today she was marrying Preston Lancaster, the man who had charmed her during a winter gala 2 years ago, who had taken her, dancing on Charleston rooftops, who had whispered promises beneath magnolia trees. Preston, with his political family and press-polished smile. Preston, who said she made him feel grounded. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" her father whispered. She nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting. "I am." They waited. But the officiant didn't nod. No signal was given. A flicker of confusion passed across the wedding planner's face as she leaned into her earpiece. The music faltered for a beat, then continued. Amelia's smile dimmed slightly. Where was Preston? Her father glanced toward the altar. It was still empty. The best man stood there alone, shifting awkwardly in his tuxedo, fingers fidgeting with the edge of his cuff. Another minute passed. The music looped. People began turning their heads, curiosity darkening into concern. Then James, the best man, stepped off the dais and strode toward them, his face drained of color. He stopped before Harold Whitmore and handed him something, a folded piece of paper. Not crisp, not ceremonial, torn from a notebook. Harold read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. "No," he said under his breath. Amelia caught the tremor in his fingers. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. He simply turned, held her gaze, and with effort handed her the note. She unfolded it slowly, fingers stiff. "Amelia, I thought I could do this, but I can't. I'm sorry, don't hate me. Preston." Her brain couldn't process the words. They slid through her like ice water. Numbness rose in her chest before panic could. She stood rooted, staring at the note as if longer focus could erase it, could make it untrue. He wasn't coming. He had left. Left her here, in front of hundreds, in the gown he helped choose, on the day they planned down to the color of the napkins. The music stopped. Silence flooded the hall like a broken dam. Amelia's mother rose from the front pew, her face stricken. Someone in the back gasped audibly. There were murmurs now, rippling outward in waves, then rising to a storm of whispers and speculation. Phones were being pulled out discreetly. She could hear it all. Poor thing. He ran. What a scandal. She felt the world shift beneath her feet. Then came her father's voice, soft but splintered. "Melly." She turned to him, saw the anguish in his eyes, and that nearly broke her. But not yet. Not here. Not while they all watched her, waiting to see the abandoned heiress crumble. She took a breath, but it wouldn't come. Her chest was too tight. Her hands trembled. And then out of the silence came a voice. Deep. Measured. Not panicked. Not familiar. "If the bride still wishes to be married, I will take his place." Time stopped. Heads turned in unison toward the back of the room. He was standing near the last row. Tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit like armor. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his expression unreadable. His presence filled the space, even from a distance, not by theatrics, but sheer gravity. Nathan Everhart. Some guests recognized him instantly. Founder of Everhart Technologies, a billionaire recluse, known for turning medtech into a global empire and keeping his private life sealed tighter than a vault. He wasn't listed on the guest list, but then again, men like Nathan didn't need invitations. They made doors open with their name alone. Amelia stared at him. She'd met him once, briefly, at a fundraiser for a children's hospital she had helped design. He'd spoken little, donated generously, and disappeared before dessert. He walked forward slowly, eyes never leaving hers. Whispers became gasps. What is he doing? Is this a joke? Is he serious? Nathan stopped at the edge of the aisle, meeting Harold Whitmore's wary glare. I understand this is not conventional, Nathan said calmly, addressing the room but watching Amelia. But if Miss Whitmore wishes to reclaim this moment, I offer myself as her groom. There is no agenda, only a choice. The silence in the room shifted again, from chaos to awe. Harold narrowed his eyes. You know what this looks like? Nathan nodded. I do. And you don't care? I care only that she doesn't walk out of here in shame because a coward ran. Amelia blinked. He wasn't begging, wasn't charming, wasn't offering rescue. He was simply offering her a way out, a different ending to this story. Her heart still throbbed from betrayal. Her knees threatened to give, but somewhere inside her, a voice whispered, you don't have to leave broken. She looked at Nathan. His gaze was steady. No pity, no expectation. Just the quiet strength of someone who had once also learned how to stand when everything else fell apart. She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it didn't shake. Let's have the wedding. The crowd exhaled. Some gasping, some scoffing, some stunned into silence. Her mother collapsed into her chair, covering her mouth. Her sister Clara muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, what the hell? But Amelia didn't flinch. Nathan extended his hand. She placed hers in it, and together they walked down the aisle. The officiant, a family friend who looked like he had just been punched in the gut, stammered as he asked if they wished to proceed. Nathan answered for them both. We do. The vows were improvised. Amelia couldn't remember half the words she said, only that she didn't cry. That Nathan's hand never trembled. That when he kissed her cheek it was as light as breath. And somehow heavier than any kiss she'd ever received. Afterward there was no celebration, just confusion, apprehension. A disjointed reception where guests picked at their salads, unsure whether to toast or gossip. But Amelia didn't care. She sat beside her new husband in a room filled with silence and murmurs and unfinished conversations. And, for the first time that day, she didn't feel small. Nathan didn't look at her much, didn't speak more than a few sentences. But when he did, they mattered. You don't owe me anything, he said, sipping his whiskey. I know, she replied. And she did. That night, as she walked out of Bellemere Estate with her hand still in his, the eyes of Charleston followed. Her. Some judgmental, some awed, some confused. But she walked with her head high, because Preston Lancaster had walked away. But Amelia Whitmore had not, and that would make all the difference. The air in Aspen was thinner, colder, sharper than anything Amelia Whitmore had known. The landscape surrounding the Everhart estate was blanketed in pristine snow, each tree branch dipped in white like icing. The mountains stood like sleeping giants, watching over the stillness of winter. It was breathtaking, and it was completely silent. Amelia stood in the doorway of her new residence, a sprawling modern estate carved into the mountainside, built of glass and steel and stone. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a cathedral of solitude, clean, perfect, unyielding. Nathan Everhart said little on the flight there. He hadn't touched her hand or looked at her longer than necessary. She had expected that. He was a man of precision, and this wasn't a romance. It was something else entirely, an arrangement neither of them had dared define. This is your wing, Nathan had said when they arrived, gesturing down a long corridor flanked with polished walnut doors. Bedroom, bathroom, study, it's yours for as long as you want it. There were staff, of course. A quiet housekeeper named Maria, a live-in chef named Bernard, and a driver she hadn't met yet. Everything functioned like a well-oiled machine, efficient and nearly invisible. But Amelia could already feel the hollowness in the walls. It was the kind of silence that echoed back at you, especially when you were alone. She explored her new quarters in silence. The bedroom was elegantly austere, cream walls, a king-sized bed with a white down comforter, and wide windows overlooking a frozen lake. A minimalist fireplace flickered on the far side, casting soft shadows across the polished floors. Her luggage had already been unpacked. The closet held a series of designer pieces, none of which she remembered selecting. The tags bore labels. Like Dior and Valentino, exquisite but sterile, curated for someone she wasn't yet. She walked to the full-length mirror and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back wore the same face, but something in her had shifted. She no longer looked like a jilted bride. She didn't look like a wife either. She looked like someone trying not to come undone in a stranger's world. Dinner that first night was quiet. Nathan sat across from her in the dining room, a long mahogany table stretching between them like a chasm. Bernard served roasted chicken with root vegetables, paired with a delicate red wine. Amelia barely tasted the food. She ate slowly, pushing things around on her plate, wondering how she had gone from vows to this. Detached pleasantries over candlelight with a man who had saved her pride but not her heart. "You're quiet," Nathan said. She looked up. "Do you expect me to be chatty?" "No." His tone was unreadable. "I expect you to be yourself." Amelia smiled faintly. "That's the problem. I'm not sure who that is right now." Nathan didn't respond. He merely took another sip of wine, his expression guarded, as if any openness would cost him something. They finished dinner in silence. In the days that followed, they became shadows of each other, crossing paths only at breakfast or when she walked the long corridors of the house to clear her mind. Nathan spent most of his time in a private office, a wing she hadn't yet been invited into. When he did emerge, it was always with a phone to his ear, speaking in clipped sentences about stock valuations or data partnerships. Amelia, for her part, drifted. She found the greenhouse behind the main house on her second day. A long-abandoned structure filled with frost-covered glass panes and overgrown vines. She asked Maria about it and the woman shrugged. "No one's touched it since his fiancée passed," Maria said quietly. "He used to sit there. Then he stopped." Amelia said nothing. She returned later that afternoon with gloves and pruning shears. The work was slow and oddly comforting. She cleared dead leaves, trimmed the brittle stalks of lavender and rosemary that had once thrived there, and washed the glass until the sunlight came through again. It became her refuge, a place where she wasn't a wife or a stranger or someone trying to justify her presence. One morning, as she sat near the window sketching a layout for a dream boutique, a place filled with warm wood, soft fabrics, and golden light, Maria appeared at the door with a cardboard box in hand. "This came for you." Amelia opened it and found a small leather notebook with a note tucked inside. The handwriting was Nathan's, elegant, sharp. "You looked like you needed a place to begin again. Thought this might help." She ran her fingers over the embossed initials on the cover. AW, it was the first thing in days that felt personal. That night, for the first time, she wrote, "This house doesn't know me, but maybe I'll leave pieces of myself in the quiet places. The greenhouse, the lake, the corners where the sun hits just right." The next day, she took Theo, the golden retriever puppy Nathan had delivered unceremoniously with a passing "you'll need company," down to the lake. He bounded through the snow with joy-only puppies, no unburdened and trusting. Amelia knelt and hugged him to her chest, burying her face in his fur. "You're the only one here who listens." Theo wagged his tail, offering no rebuttal. Later that evening, as she returned to the kitchen for tea, she found Nathan already there, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, sipping coffee as the snow outside kissed the windows. "You're up late," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded and didn't press. She moved to the kettle and waited in silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you always live like this?" "Like what?" "Structured. Silent. Alone." Nathan didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Alone is easier." Amelia turned toward him, leaning against the counter. "Easier than what?" "Than losing people." His eyes stayed on the floor. She exhaled. "You're not the only one who's lost things, Nathan." "I know," he said. "But I built this place to survive the loss, not to relive it," she said. Nothing more. But that night, as she lay in bed with Theo curled at her feet, she realized something. Nathan wasn't cruel. He was careful. He'd wrapped himself in silence because the alternative had nearly destroyed him once. And now she was here. A living reminder that no matter how high the walls, life had a way of finding its way in. The days continued, each one a little different than the last. They didn't become close, but they became aware. He started joining her on walks with Theo, claiming it was for the exercise, though she noticed he always showed up after she did. He once left a book outside her door, a memoir by an architect she admired. Another time he asked her out of nowhere what her favorite childhood memory was. She had told him, surprised by the question. My father built me a treehouse with real wallpaper and a window. He painted my name above the door. I thought it was a castle. Nathan smiled faintly. He built you a kingdom. He believed I could rule it. There was something unspoken in the pause that followed. A recognition of the contrast between the woman who had once believed in fairy tales and the one sitting across from him now, trying to build herself back from the ruins. One night, while flipping through design magazines in the greenhouse, she came across a news article on her phone. It was about a charity initiative Nathan funded, STEM programs for underprivileged youth in rural America. The pictures showed him surrounded by children, laughing, awkwardly holding robots and science kits. He never spoke of it. The next day she asked, "Why don't you tell people what you actually do?" He looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You let them call you a recluse, cold, even cruel. But you do things. Good things." "Why hide that?" He paused. "Because once people think they know you, they stop listening." She nodded. She understood. In the greenhouse that evening, she jotted another note in her journal. "I don't think he's trying to be distant anymore. I think he's just forgotten how to be close." She wasn't sure yet what she was doing there, what they were to each other. But for the first time since stepping off that plane, she wasn't afraid to find out. She looked out across the frozen lake, Theo asleep beside her, the sky fading to violet behind the trees. Somewhere inside this house of steel and silence, something was beginning. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was real. And it was hers. The wind in Aspen had a voice. Some days it howled, some days it whispered. But tonight, as snow whispered softly against the high glass walls of the Everhart estate, it did neither. It simply watched. Inside the great stone and glass home, the silence had a presence of its own, not empty, just dense. It was the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own doubts. Amelia had grown used to that silence. She had begun in her own way to fill it. She spent most of her time now in the greenhouse. What had once been forgotten had become something of a sanctuary. Beneath its partially restored ceiling, she'd nurtured the lavender back to life. She'd pruned the stubborn rosemary and rescued a stubborn ivy from the brink. It wasn't just about plants. It was about control, restoration. In the soil, in the watering schedules, in the sun charts pinned to the wall, there was order. Something that had been ripped from her life weeks ago and still hadn't quite returned. Her evenings were solitary but not aimless. She'd taken to sketching again. Outlines of interior spaces, boutique designs, hypothetical storefronts she might want. Day open. She wasn't drawing for anyone but herself. She didn't need praise or approval. She needed purpose. Theo, the golden retriever pup Nathan had given her, followed her everywhere. He was loud in his affection, soft in his presence. Sometimes he curled beneath her desk while she worked. Sometimes he sat beside her on the window ledge overlooking the frozen lake. He didn't judge her silences, didn't require answers. In a house of wealth and restraint, he was the only thing that felt freely given. But nights were still difficult. It happened for the first time on a Tuesday. She had fallen asleep reading a design magazine in bed, Theo snoring softly beside her. At some hour between dreams and consciousness it began, the memory masquerading as a nightmare. She was back in the ballroom, the chandeliers, the music that faltered, the note in her hand. Preston's handwriting. "I can't do this." The hum of whispers turned into roaring laughter. When she jolted awake, sweat was clinging to her neck, her sheets twisted. Her heart pounded, in her ears like a drum. She sat up quickly, gasping for air, Theo now alert at her side. And then she saw him, Nathan, seated in the corner near the fireplace, lit by the soft orange glow. He was wearing a grey sweatshirt and dark lounge pants, barefoot. His elbows rested on his knees, fingers loosely laced. He looked neither startled nor unwelcome, as though he'd been there for a while. She blinked. "What are you doing here?" His voice was quiet. "You were screaming." She hadn't realized. "I was?" "You've been having the dream for 3 nights now." Amelia swallowed hard, pressing her hand against her forehead. You've been watching me? I checked the hallway around this time. I noticed. Tonight was louder. Something about his tone. It wasn't clinical or cold. It wasn't invasive. It was steady, grounded. She didn't know how to respond. She expected him to leave, to retreat back into his world of locked doors and exact schedules. Instead, he stood, walked over, and placed a glass of water on her bedside table. Drink this, it helps. She took it wordlessly. Theo settled again at her side, and for a moment all three of them sat in silence. Two people and a dog bound by a kind of stillness that was neither avoidance nor connection. Just presence. Do you dream? She asked. Surprising herself, Nathan glanced toward the window. I used to. Then I stopped. Now they come when I least want them. She nodded. That sounds familiar. He didn't ask about the dream. He didn't offer pity. When he left, he didn't say goodnight. But that night, for the first time in weeks, Amelia fell asleep without waking again. The next day, she found something waiting for her in the greenhouse. A small hand-carved wooden bench. Simple. Elegant. New. There was no note, but she knew who had placed it there. That week, small shifts began to ripple through the quiet. Nathan no longer vanished for 12 hours at a time. Some mornings, he joined her and Theo for their lake walks, always keeping. A few feet of distance, his hands buried in his coat pockets. When she made breakfast, he stopped offering to have Bernard cook it and instead sat across from her in the kitchen, eating toast with the solemnity of a monk. He started asking questions, not as a businessman, but as a man curious about the person sharing his home. Why interior design? Because space affects how people feel. It's the difference between surviving and belonging. He listened. He always listened. One evening, Amelia found herself pacing the halls, unsure what she was looking for. She turned a corner she hadn't explored before and stumbled into a long hallway lined with doors. At the far end was one that stood slightly ajar. From inside, she heard the faint sound of laughter. Young, high-pitched, joyous. She stepped closer. It wasn't a person. It was a recording, playing softly through a speaker. She pushed the door open and found herself standing in a room she hadn't expected. A workspace. Not sterile or cold like his office, but vibrant. A chalkboard with equations. Shelves filled with robotics kits. A series of framed letters from students. Thank you notes, sketches, notes scribbled in crayons. One drawing showed a figure with Mr. E written in block letters, surrounded by smiling stick-figure children. Amelia turned as Nathan entered behind her. He didn't look startled to see her there. You mentor kids? She asked. He nodded. STEM programs, rural schools, some foster centers. Started it 6 years ago. She scanned the room again. Why keep it secret? I don't. You don't tell anyone. I don't market it. She raised an eyebrow. That's different. Nathan stepped into the room, leaning against the wall, his gaze drifting over the chalkboard. After Claire died, he said slowly, I didn't know what to do with the guilt of surviving. So I poured everything into work, money, expansion, control. But at night, I felt like I was walking through ash. Amelia said nothing. She didn't have to. One day I got a letter from a 10-year-old girl who'd used one of our old VR tools to help her autistic brother learn math. She called it the game that gave her brother a voice. He exhaled slowly. That was the first night I slept through. Amelia looked at him, not as a stranger or billionaire or the man who had rescued her from disgrace, but as someone, deeply human, bruised but still trying. When she left the room, she whispered something barely audible. Thank you for not letting me fall alone. That night, Nathan asked if she wanted to join him for dinner, not out of politeness, but out of intention. She said yes. They ate in the kitchen, not the dining room, on mismatched plates over risotto and red wine. He asked about her boutique, her favorite projects, the most ridiculous clients she'd ever had. She laughed for the first time in days, nearly choking when she imitated a bride who demanded rose gold lighting with a moonlight undertone. He smiled. Not the tight-lipped press smile. A real one. Brief but real. After dinner, he surprised her again. I'd like to show you something tomorrow. Something outside of here. She hesitated. Outside? There's a community center in Glenwood Springs. I helped fund their tech lab. They're having a workshop. I thought, maybe you'd want to come. Amelia stared at him. This was not the man who'd greeted her with contracts and conditions. This was a man offering space beside him, not behind him. "I'd like that," she said. When he nodded, his expression unreadable, she could see the tension behind it. Vulnerability was still foreign to him. Every offer an act of bravery. She saw that now, and it made her braver too. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "He is not warmth, he is structure. But even stone holds the sun if you let it." In the vast, cold quiet of a mansion built to shield a broken heart, the smallest cracks had started to show. Not in weakness, but in grace, in honesty, in the possibility that healing could happen not in sudden declarations, but in the soft, steady return of trust. And Amelia, once left at the altar with a trembling hand and a fractured voice, now stood beside a man learning, one slow human step at a time, how to speak with his heart. Snow fell like a hush over the rooftops of Aspen, but inside the Everhart estate, the quiet that had once felt sacred now pressed heavily against Amelia Whitmore's chest. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the wedding that wasn't meant to happen, since she'd taken Nathan Everhart's hand in a moment of fierce pride and defiance. What had begun as an act of survival had grown into something unnameable, something uncertain yet no longer hollow. Their connection was not love, not yet, but it had become layered. Tentative conversation, shared meals, the echo of healing in unexpected places. And then the outside world remembered her name. The first message came in the early morning, just after sunrise. Her phone buzzed against the nightstand, a persistent vibration that broke the peaceful rhythm of Theo's breathing at her side. It was a text from Cammie, her assistant back in Charleston. "Are you okay? Please call me. It's everywhere." Amelia's pulse skipped. She sat up, thumb hovering above the message. Everywhere. What was? She opened her browser. The headline struck her like a punch. "Jilted heiress or gold-digging opportunist. Inside the mystery marriage of Amelia Whitmore and billionaire Nathan Everhart." Her breath caught. She clicked. A flood of images and half-truths spilled onto the screen. The article had everything. Her being left at the altar by Preston Lancaster, the abrupt substitution by Nathan, photos from the ceremony where her expression looked too calm, too calculated. A quote from an anonymous source suggested the entire thing had been staged to manipulate public sympathy or to gain access to the Everhart fortune. They called her a social climber, a schemer, a beautiful face with sharp ambition and a hollow heart. Amelia closed the screen, her hand trembling slightly. The second article followed hours later. It was worse. This time they included personal photos, private moments with Preston, from happier days pulled from old, now deleted social media accounts. One showed her on a beach, her arms wrapped around Preston's neck. Another was a blurry shot of them laughing over coffee. The implication was clear. She hadn't moved on. She had orchestrated a pivot. The headline this time was cruel. "Wife, on paper mistress at heart." By noon, her boutique's website was inundated with hate messages. Her inbox was full of client cancellations. Her name trended on gossip forums where strangers picked apart her body, her motives, her worth. No one cared what was true. The truth was too quiet. It didn't sell. She paced the halls, heart racing, head full of heat and disbelief. She needed to speak to someone, him, the one person who had promised to be on her side. Nathan. She found him in his office, standing behind a wide desk, speaking in low tones into a headset. The room smelled like old wooden control. He didn't look up when she entered. She waited. When he ended the call, he simply said, "I saw it." "That's it?" Her voice cracked. He turned toward her, jaw tense. "The team is working on it. They're coordinating a statement, setting up a timeline of facts. We'll bury it with better headlines. It's already moving down the cycle." She stared at him, stunned. "You think this is about optics?" "It's not," he replied carefully. "But optics matter." "To who? Investors or you?" Nathan blinked. She stepped forward. "I'm being called a fraud, Nathan. A liar. A gold digger. Do you know what it's like to read those words? About yourself? To watch strangers pick through your memories like vultures? And all you can say is the team is handling it?" "I'm trying to protect you," he said, voice lower now. "No," she replied, voice tight. "You're trying to manage me." He stepped closer, arms at his sides, clearly struggling. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to ask if I'm okay." A long silence stretched between them, but he didn't ask. He didn't move, and something inside her fractured. She turned and walked out, her steps echoing against the stone floors. She didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. She returned to the guest house, the small structure at the edge of the property, which had once been offered as an extension of privacy, but now felt like an escape route. Theo followed her, sensing the shift in her breathing. She sat on the floor beside the fireplace and finally let the tears come. She cried not just for the public betrayal, but for the deeper wound. The man who had stood beside her and promised silence would never speak for him, and who now was disappearing into it once more. That evening she left a note on the hallway table. This is not about reputation. It's about being seen. I'm not a headline and I'm not a solution. If you can't fight for me with more than silence, I'll fight for myself. Alone. She didn't leave the estate, not physically. But she withdrew. Days passed. Nathan didn't come. He sent updates, brief texts. We've removed the story from several outlets. Legals issued a cease and desist. The boutique's ratings have been repaired. But they weren't conversations. They were status reports, and she didn't want status reports. She wanted honesty. A question. A moment of rawness. She began waking early again, returning to the greenhouse with Theo before the frost melted. She sat in the chair Nathan had once left there, drawing quietly in the dim morning light. Her sketches had grown sharper, more angular. Not sad, but changed. Her lines held edges now, clarity forged from pain. She stopped eating meals in the main house. She stopped replying to his messages. Each day felt like a thin line she walked between reclaiming herself and mourning what had never quite begun. One morning, while clearing out the supply closet near the greenhouse, she found a dusty box labeled Archives, not for publication. Inside were press releases, charity brochures, and several folders of Everhart media assets. One document in particular caught her eye, a rejected interview draft from a major business magazine. In the piece, the journalist had asked Nathan about his personal life. His reply had been blunt. "I've lost too much to let anyone that close. Again." The quote had been redacted in the final version. She sat down slowly, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. She thought she understood him, but maybe she had only seen what she wanted to see. A man thawing, a man trying. But maybe all she'd ever been was a placeholder, something polite and beautiful to sit in the place of heartbreak. That night she found herself back in the greenhouse, staring out the glass panels, the mountains in the distance blurred by, falling snow. Theo whined softly beside her. She whispered aloud, "I'm still here, but I don't know how much longer I'll wait." Her voice cracked. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let the snow silence her once more. In the Everhart estate, there was stillness again. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was distance. Heavy. Waiting. And Amelia wondered, not for the first time, if Nathan Everhart had ever truly let anyone in, or if she had been just another quiet moment in the fortress he called home. Winter in Aspen had begun to melt at the edges. The snow no longer blanketed the world in stillness. It pooled on the roads, revealing patches of dormant grass, the dull brown of transition. The sky remained grey, but the light lingered longer now, hesitant but present. And still Amelia Whitmore waited in silence. It had been 2 weeks since the headlines first exploded. 2 weeks since strangers tore her life apart with speculation and sarcasm. 2 weeks since Nathan Everhart had failed to meet her in that space of vulnerability she had carved open with trembling hands. His actions had been strategic, swift, effective, but never emotional. He had saved her reputation, but not her spirit. Now she moved through the estate like a guest in a museum. Quiet, respectful, unseen. She spent her days in the greenhouse or by the lake, and her nights writing in the journal Nathan once gifted her, now frayed at the edges from use. But her entries had grown shorter, more restrained. She was no longer writing to understand. She was writing to remember. Remember who she had been before her name became a headline, before a stranger offered her his last name out of rescue rather than love. Theo was her only constant. His warm eyes followed her everywhere. A silent protector who never judged, never asked. When she cried, he placed his head in her lap. When she walked in circles under the sky, he matched her steps. But she missed being known. Not admired. Not pitied. Just seen. One afternoon, as she reorganized a row of terracotta pots in the greenhouse, Maria appeared in the doorway holding a small envelope. Her expression was unreadable. "This was delivered by hand," Maria said softly, placing it on the workbench before turning away. Amelia wiped her hands and opened it slowly. Inside was a note written in a hand she recognized immediately. Her. Sisters. Melly, come home, please. Just for a few days. You don't need to explain anything. No cameras, no interviews. Just your room, mom's tea, and me. Charleston misses you, and maybe you miss you too. Clara Amelia's fingers lingered on the paper. The thought of going back was terrifying. There were ghosts in Charleston. Memories stitched into wallpaper, into childhood furniture, into street corners that knew too much. But there was also clarity there. The kind that comes when you return not as someone broken, but as someone rebuilding. That evening, she knocked on Nathan's office door. He opened it wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the faint scent of cedar and ink clinging to the room. His eyes flicked up, startled by her presence. I'm leaving for a few days, she said. He didn't speak right away. Leaving? To Charleston, to see Clara. He nodded once, slow. I understand. She waited for more. A question, a protest, something human. But he only asked, will you need the plane? No, she replied quietly. I've already booked a commercial flight. A silence thickened between them like fog. I'll let the staff know, he said. She nodded. Thank you. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her at the threshold. Amelia. She looked back. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. You didn't hurt me, Nathan. You just weren't there when I needed you. And that hurts in a different way. He didn't argue. She didn't ask him to. The next morning before sunrise, she left the estate with a single suitcase and Theo at her side. The drive to the airport was quiet, and when the plane took off, she pressed her forehead to the cold window and exhaled. Charleston met her with rain. Her childhood home, a colonial two-story with peeling blue shutters and jasmine crawling up. The porch rail hadn't changed, but stepping inside felt like crossing a time zone, not just in hours but in lifetimes. Clara ran to meet her at the door, arms outstretched, and for the first time in months, Amelia felt herself fully embraced, not as a bride, not as a brand, but as a sister. They didn't talk much the first night, just sat in pajamas on the old couch, watching terrible television and eating peanut butter out of the jar. It was a kind of therapy that required no words, no explanations. The next day, Clara took her to their mother's garden. It was overgrown now since their mother's passing 2 years earlier. But something about the wildness comforted Amelia. Life, unpruned, still grew. This place misses you, Clara said, kneeling beside a stubborn rose bush. I miss knowing who I am in it, Amelia admitted. You're not lost, her sister replied. You're just evolving. Later that afternoon, Amelia walked through the city alone. She visited the boutique she once ran. The windows had been cleaned, the new manager waving hesitantly as Amelia passed. She smiled but didn't enter. It wasn't hers anymore, not really. She stopped at the church where her almost wedding had taken place. She stood outside, hands in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the heavy wooden doors. They were closed now, silent. But she could still hear the music, still feel the stillness before the storm. She didn't cry, not this time. She simply whispered, "Thank you for breaking me, because I never would have known how strong I was without it." On her third night home, she and Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, drinking tea from chipped mugs. "Do you love him?" Clara asked suddenly. Amelia stared into the mug. "I don't know. Do you want to?" She didn't answer right away. "I want him to let me," Clara nodded. "Then tell him that. If he doesn't know how, maybe he needs a reason to try." When Amelia returned to Aspen 4 days later, the world was again coated in snow. But this time it felt different. Less like silence, more like a blank page. Nathan was waiting in the foyer when she arrived. He looked different, slightly undone. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I found pieces of it, and I brought the rest back with me." He nodded, stepping aside as she entered. Theo barked once and bounded. Inside, tail wagging furiously, she walked past Nathan, then stopped. Turned back. "I didn't go to run away," she said. "I went so I wouldn't forget who I was before all of this. Before the headlines, before the rescue. I needed to remember that I was whole before you ever offered your hand." His voice was rough when he replied. "I know." She took a breath. "And if we're going to have any chance at anything, You need to know that I won't trade silence for safety. I need honesty, presence, not protection dressed up as distance. Nathan's throat worked, his fingers twitching at his sides. Was afraid, he said finally. Of what? Of becoming what I swore I wouldn't. My father built walls out of money and pride. He loved only when it was convenient. I thought if I never needed anyone, I'd never repeat him. She stepped closer. But needing someone isn't weakness, Nathan. It's the beginning of real strength. He reached out carefully, as though afraid she might pull away. She didn't. I want to try, he said. But I'm going to get it wrong. Then we'll begin with that, she said softly. Not promises, just presence. And for the first time in weeks, the space between them wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with something else entirely. Hope. The morning. Sun filtered through the tall windows of the Everhart estate, illuminating dust particles dancing like lazy snowflakes in the air. Amelia Whitmore stood barefoot in the center of the study, a stack of old photo albums spread out on the table before her. Most of them had once belonged to Nathan's mother, full of Polaroids and yellowing snapshots, moments captured before. The weight of legacy and expectation smothered this house. Nathan had left them for her the night before wordlessly, as if offering not just memories but a quiet apology for how long he had kept them locked away. The shift between them since her return from Charleston had been delicate, like glass warming beneath sunlight, slow, cautious, and unpredictable. They were speaking more now, truly speaking. He joined her for meals, asked about her sketches, sometimes lingered in the greenhouse while she worked without uttering a word. There was no dramatic confession, no grand romance, but there was presence, and in a house that once felt like a mausoleum, presence was everything. That afternoon, Nathan found her on the floor of the study, Theo sprawled across her legs, tail lazily thudding every so often. "Find anything good?" Nathan asked. She looked up at him, holding up a photo of a teenage boy beside a treehouse halfway through collapse. "You built this?" He smiled faintly. "I tried. The tree didn't survive." "You look happy in this." "It was before. My father told me it was a waste of time." She lowered the photo. "He stole your softness early, didn't he?" Nathan didn't reply. But his silence wasn't rejection. It was admission. Amelia set the photo aside. "I've been thinking about the house." "What about it?" "It feels like it's holding its breath." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "This place, it was built to impress, not to live in. Every room has a different mood, but none of them feel like a home. It's like someone tried to control grief by turning it into architecture." Nathan blinked, caught off guard. "That's exactly what my mother said when she moved in." She smiled softly. She was right. She stood brushing dust from her knees. "I want to help change it." "You mean redecorate?" he asked. "No," she said firmly. "I mean transform it, reimagine it, make it feel alive again, make it feel like you." He hesitated. "I don't even know what that looks like." "Then let's find out." For the first time since they met, Nathan didn't counter with logic or avoidance. He simply said, "Okay." And so they began. Amelia took inventory of the rooms, starting with the library, then the cold sunroom no one entered, and the grand dining hall that had hosted no true gathering in years. She noted the bones beneath the extravagance, spaces that could hold laughter instead of echoes, windows that begged for light and color. But more than design, she studied Nathan. She watched the way he stood in each room, the corners where he lingered longest, the way his eyes softened when he passed by certain artifacts, his mother's favorite vase, a photo of him and Claire tucked behind dusty books. She asked gentle questions, not about color palettes, but about feelings. What would make you want to spend time in this room? What memory here would you keep if you had to choose one? At first, his answers were short. Not sure. I don't think about it, but slowly they deepened. He spoke about his mother's piano playing in the parlor, about how Claire used to build Lego castles at the foot of the staircase, about how he avoided the upstairs sitting room because that's where he told his mother she wouldn't recover. It was grief unveiled. Not dramatic, just true. And in return, Amelia offered hers. She shared how she used to sleep in closets as a child because the space felt safe. How her mother's scent, lavender and lemon, still followed her in dreams. how she had never fully unpacked after Preston left because part of her had always assumed she'd be leaving again. There were no tears, just space, open and brave. One evening, they tackled the upstairs hallway. The walls were lined with portraits, oil paintings of Everhards from generations past, each one dressed in solemn black, staring out with severity. Amelia stood back, arms crossed. "No wonder this place feels haunted," she murmured. "They look like they'd scold you for smiling." Nathan chuckled, surprising them both. "My father used to say these portraits reminded us of the standards we carry." She turned to him. "And what do you think they remind you of?" He was quiet. Then, "Obligations I didn't choose." Without asking, she took down the largest portrait, a heavy dark depiction of his great-grandfather. "Hey," he said, half protesting. "You're not him," she said firmly. "You don't have to live under his eyes." She left the nail bare. Empty space. They stood staring at it together. Later that night, Nathan appeared in the greenhouse with 2 mugs of tea. "You never told me," he said, handing her one. "What your home in Charleston smelled like." She blinked. "You remembered?" He nodded. "Lemon and lavender, right?" Her throat tightened. "Yeah." He pointed to the herbs she'd been growing. "I smelled both in here tonight." Her fingers curled around the mug. "I guess I brought a piece of it with me." He sat beside her. "Maybe we both did." A quiet moment passed. Then she asked, "Nathan, when you look at me now, do you see a mistake you're still trying to fix?" He turned, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "No. I see a woman who walked into chaos and held her head high. Who challenged my silence. Who reminded me that healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means choosing to build something in spite of it." Her breath caught. He reached out, slow, not out of hesitation, but reverence, and touched her hand. "I'm not offering perfection, Amelia, but I'm here, fully, finally." She didn't speak. She just moved her hand into his. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. The dining room was transformed into a communal space with music and books and warmth. The sunroom now had life, plants spilling from corners, cushions embroidered, with symbols of places Nathan had once visited but never felt connected to until now. The hallway of portraits remained bare, each empty space a quiet act of reclamation. And one morning, Nathan stood at the edge of the greenhouse and said something that made Amelia freeze mid-step. "Move in. Fully, no more guest house. This is your home too if you want it." She stared at him, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You mean, I want you in every room. Not as a visitor, not as a symbol, as you." She didn't cry. She smiled. And she said yes. That night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the lake, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered something into the dark. "This house no longer echoes." And Nathan whispered back, "Because now it breathes." In the quiet that followed, they didn't speak of the past, or the mistakes, or the pain. They stood in the present, and it was enough. Spring arrived in Aspen with unexpected softness. The snow that had once hardened the edges of the world began to retreat into the soil, leaving behind tender green shoots, damp earth, and a breeze that carried the scent of thawing pine and possibility. The Everhart estate, once a monument to silence, now exhaled with life. Amelia Whitmore had moved into the main house 2 weeks earlier. It was not a symbolic gesture, not a line crossed in haste, but a decision made with quiet intention. She didn't arrive with boxes or declarations. She simply chose the east-facing bedroom next to Nathan's and unpacked one small suitcase. A linen dress, a worn novel, a sketchbook, and a photo of her and Clara as children laughing in a field of wildflowers. Nathan didn't speak of the change. He only shifted subtly to accommodate it. His routines began to weave around hers. Morning coffee left steaming on the kitchen island, his footsteps joining hers on the lake path in the evenings, his voice no longer so careful when asking how her day had gone. They were 2 people sharing space, slowly learning to share silence, warmth, and even dreams. And then the past arrived. It began with an envelope, delivered by hand just as before. No return address, no stamp. Maria found it resting on the stone ledge outside the front door. She hesitated before giving it to Amelia, her brow furrowed with quiet concern. Amelia opened it alone in the greenhouse, Theo lying beside her. Inside, a single note, typed unsigned. Secrets, built on grief, never stay buried. Does he know about Claire? Her breath caught. The greenhouse, once her sanctuary, suddenly felt too tight. She folded the paper once, then again, until it disappeared into her palm. The words echoed in her chest, not because they shocked her, but because they confirmed what she had long suspected. Someone was watching. Someone knew more than they should. She found Nathan in his study, reading an architectural journal, glasses perched on his nose. "I got a note," she said, holding it out. He looked at it once and grew still. He didn't take it from her. He didn't need to. He already knew. Amelia sat down across from him, her voice even. "Who sent it?" "I don't know," he said after a moment. "Do you think it's a threat?" "No. It's a warning." She looked at him carefully. "Nathan, what don't I know?" He removed his glasses, setting them down with care. Claire's death wasn't an accident. The silence that followed wasn't shock. Not truly. Amelia had always sensed the gaps in his story, the moments he brushed over too smoothly. "She died in a car crash," he continued, voice low. "But the crash wasn't random. She was being followed, hounded, by press, by people trying to sell pieces of our lives. That day she tried to get away from it. She was tired. She wasn't thinking clearly." Amelia felt her chest tighten. There was a letter in her apartment. She'd written it weeks before, he said. "Not a goodbye note. Not quite, but enough to make me question everything. She was suffocating Amelia because of me." She stood slowly, walking to the window, arms crossed. "You think you caused her death?" "I know I built the life that broke her." Amelia turned, eyes shining but steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to carry her weight. Or mine. Because I thought if I stayed silent, I could contain it." "But you can't," she said softly. "Grief doesn't shrink in the dark. It multiplies." He looked up at her. Something raw in his gaze. "I don't want to make the same mistake with you." "Then stop trying to protect me from pain by hiding your own." The moment passed between them like a bridge quietly built. The next day, a second envelope arrived. This one contained photographs. One showed Amelia in the greenhouse. Another captured her and Nathan walking side by side, smiling faintly. The angles were distant but clear, taken with a long lens through trees. Someone had been on the property, watching. This time, it was Nathan who reacted first. Security was called. Cameras were checked. The property perimeter was reinforced, but the damage had already been done. That night, Nathan didn't retreat to his study. He came to Amelia's room, not with questions or apologies, but with a blanket, 2 mugs of tea, and a silence that no longer sought to avoid but to comfort. "Why us?" she whispered, curled beside him on the floor, the fire casting gold against their faces. "Because the world hates quiet healing. It prefers spectacle, noise, scandal." She looked at him. "Then we'll be quiet anyway." He smiled, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. "We're not alone anymore, Amelia. We face them together." The following morning, Clara called. "Have you seen the news?" she asked, her voice tight. Amelia hadn't. She opened her laptop. There, it was. Photos leaked from Nathan's security feed. Headlines blaring speculation. Is Nathan Everhart's new wife just another PR move? Shocking footage suggests staged intimacy. There were screenshots of them laughing by the lake, Amelia's hand on his chest, Nathan brushing something from her hair. Moments that were private, tender, stolen. Amelia's stomach turned. Not because of the content, but because someone had trespassed on what little was still sacred. She stood and marched to Nathan's office, the article open on her phone. He looked up the moment she entered. "Someone inside did this," she said. "Someone with access." "I know." "Then what happens now?" He rose, moving toward her with a steadiness she had come to recognize as his version of urgency. "Now," he said, "we stop being defensive." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean we go public." Her mouth parted. "You want to give them more?" "No," he said. "I want to take away their power." Later that week, they appeared together at a press event Nathan had once planned to cancel. It was meant to announce a new education initiative. But the room buzzed with speculation about their relationship. Journalists leaned forward like wolves, But before any questions could be asked, Nathan stepped forward. There's been a lot of talk about my wife, he began, his voice clear. And not enough listening. The crowd hushed. She didn't marry me for money. She didn't steal my name. She gave me something I hadn't had in years. Honesty, stillness, a reason to want more than control. He turned slightly, eyes on Amelia now, and I married her because I needed to remember what it means to feel human. She didn't rescue me. We're not saving each other. We're choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially then. No one spoke for a long moment. Then slowly applause broke. Not loud, not forced, just real. That night, Amelia sat with Nathan on the balcony, watching the stars. The danger hadn't passed. The intrusions might not stop. But something had shifted. She turned to him. What if they come again? They will, he said. But now we're not hiding. She smiled. Then let them come. And beneath the stars, the heiress who once stood alone leaned into the man who had once chosen silence. And together they faced a world that didn't yet know what to do with a love that asked for nothing but truth. The streets of Soho hummed beneath the pale gold of late afternoon light. Outside the studio windows, the city pulsed with life. Taxi horns, laughter from passing pedestrians, the low throb of music leaking from an open window down the block. But inside the airy loft, Amelia Whitmore stood utterly still, her fingers curled around a leather-bound journal she hadn't seen in nearly a year. Nathan had left it on the kitchen counter that morning before heading to a meeting. No note, no announcement, just the book, its edges worn, the spine bent from overuse. She recognized it instantly. It was the same journal she had found hidden in the locked drawer of his study back in Aspen. The one she hadn't opened then. The one she'd walked away from when her own silence had become louder than his. Her heart thudded as she sat at the dining table, brushing her fingertips over the cover. Her name was etched faintly into the corner. Amelia. Just her name. No title. No last name. Just the woman she had been to him. Before the noise, before the press, before he had learned how to say what he felt with anything other than protection and distance. She opened it. The first page was blank, but the second one held his handwriting. Neat, but rushed, like the thoughts had come faster than his hand could keep up. The day you arrived at the estate, I thought you were a wound I wasn't ready to reopen. But you weren't. You were the balm. You were the quiet that didn't demand anything. You didn't ask me to explain the shadows. I just found myself wanting to let them go. She kept reading. Entry after entry, day after day, he had recorded. Pieces of her. Of them. Small fragments. The way she laughed at her own jokes. The way she touched every plant in the greenhouse like it was a conversation. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. There were pages written after their fights. Pages full of things he hadn't said aloud. His shame, his fear, his longing. I loved Claire. I did. But I was never present with her the way I am with Amelia. Claire wanted a version of me I couldn't give. And I think she knew that. Amelia wants only the truth, even when it's ugly. And I'm terrified because she might be the first person who sees me and still stays. The tears didn't come all at once. They built slowly, quietly, until her throat was too thick to swallow and her vision blurred. She turned another page. I'm not good at this, at letting people in, at not managing every outcome. But I want to try, because she deserves someone who doesn't flinch at the weight of her heart. She deserves someone who sees her, not just saves her. She deserves everything, and I'm afraid I'll only ever know how to give her half. She closed the book carefully, holding it to her chest. All this time, he had been speaking to her. She just hadn't known how to listen. That evening, Nathan returned later than expected. His tie was loosened, his expression drawn but gentle as he stepped into the loft and found her waiting on the balcony, barefoot, the journal beside her, on the table. He stilled when he saw it. You read it, he said quietly. I did. A pause stretched between them, uncertain. She didn't ask why he wrote it. She already knew. She didn't ask why he had waited so long to share it. That answer lived in every page, fear, shame, love unlearned and relearned. Instead, she asked something else. Why now? He stepped closer, his voice low. Because I realized I kept telling myself I was protecting you from my past, from the parts of me that weren't clean. But what I was really doing was keeping you at a distance. And I don't want that anymore. She looked at him, the city lights flickering in her eyes. I never needed perfect, Nathan. Just honest. He sat beside her, watching her carefully. I want to build something with you. Not just decorate a house or share space. I want a life, one with laughter and silence and the occasional disaster. All of it. She reached for his hand. So let's build it. They didn't speak much more that night. Words had already done their work. Instead, they moved around each other with ease, like two melodies finally finding harmony. He made dinner while she painted in the small studio space at the back of the loft. They listened to old jazz records and danced barefoot in the kitchen, but not all shadows could be outrun. 3 days later, the final leak came. It was a private email, one Nathan had sent years ago to Claire, a message written during a period of their growing estrangement. It wasn't cruel, but it was cold, dismissive, and it revealed more about his inability to deal with grief than any public scandal ever had. It spread fast. News outlets seized on it. Psychologists were brought on television to analyze his emotional detachment. Anonymous sources came forward, former employees, distant relatives, all with their versions of who Nathan Everhart had been before Amelia. And suddenly, she was no longer just a misunderstood heiress. She was the woman standing beside the emotionally broken billionaire. Nathan wanted to issue a statement. I should take responsibility, he said, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed. Amelia touched his shoulder. You already have. With me. You don't owe them what they're demanding. What matters is what we do next. He looked at her. So what do? We shift the story. A week later, they hosted a quiet event. Not a press conference, not a spectacle. Just a dinner. Friends, artists, educators, a few reporters. They spoke about the foundation they were launching together, focused on mental health, grief support, and emotional literacy for young adults. Nathan spoke, but not as a CEO or a man issuing a defense. He spoke as someone who had learned the cost of silence. I've made mistakes, he said plainly. I've been afraid to ask for help. I've chosen control over vulnerability more times than I can count. But I've also learned that strength doesn't come from shutting people out. It comes from showing up anyway. Amelia stood beside him, proud, grounded. Afterward, as guests lingered, sipping wine and trading stories, Nathan turned to her. There's one more thing, he said, pulling a small envelope from his jacket. She took it, opening it slowly. Inside was a deed to a modest property in Napa Valley, a vineyard, small but full of possibility. I thought maybe we could plant something of our own, he said softly. She looked up at him, overwhelmed. I wanted to give you a place not tied to the past, he continued. Not Aspen, not Soho, not Charleston. Just us. Something we build from the ground up. Amelia stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. And in that moment, she didn't feel like a woman who had been left at the altar or a public symbol of resilience. She felt like someone who had returned home to herself and found love waiting, unguarded, at the door. The morning of the ceremony dawned quiet and golden. The vineyard bathed in soft light that filtered through early fog like a benediction. Rows of newly planted vines stretched into the distance, delicate and tentative, yet full of promise. Like everything Nathan and Amelia had fought to build. It was spring in Napa Valley, and for once the world outside seemed to mirror the slow bloom happening within. There were no strings of press vans outside, no gilded invitations sent to socialites or executives, no opulent cathedral or city skyline. Just an open garden surrounded by friends, chosen family, and the kind of silence that felt like reverence, not emptiness. Amelia stood before the full-length mirror in the modest guest cottage they'd restored together, adjusting the ivory lace along her wrist. Her dress wasn't couture, nor borrowed from a designer showroom. It was hand-stitched by a local seamstress, inspired by her mother's old sketches, and sewn with the kind of care that made each imperfection feel sacred. Her hair was loose, adorned with fresh jasmine, her mother's favorite flower. Cammy helped with the final touches, eyes shimmering. You're the calmest bride I've ever seen, she whispered. Amelia smiled. That's because it doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like breathing. In another cottage, Nathan fastened the cufflinks his mother once gave his father, the only heirloom he chose to keep. He looked out the window, watching the rows of guests arrive quietly, many of them unfamiliar to the world he used to inhabit. Educators, former employees of the foundation, a group of teenagers who'd graduated from their first grief mentorship program, people who knew them not as headlines but as human beings. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. For the first time in years, he felt wholly present. not managing risk or protecting image, but simply preparing to stand beside the woman who had made him feel alive in his own skin. The ceremony began beneath an arch of climbing roses and olive branches, a gentle breeze stirring Amelia's veil as she walked the gravel path toward him. Theo trotted ahead proudly, carrying a garland around his neck and his usual air of importance. When their eyes met, nothing else mattered. Not the scandals, not the histories, not the scars they both still bore beneath the surface. Nathan took her hand, and the officiant, an old friend from the community center where Amelia had taught briefly, began the ceremony. "There is no perfect love," he said gently, looking at them both. "Only love that stays, that adapts, that softens without breaking, that offers its hand again and again, even after fear, even after silence." They exchanged vows not written in calligraphy or rehearsed, but spoken from memory, from hearts that had learned how to mend without erasing the fractures. "I won't promise to never make mistakes," Nathan said, "but I will promise this: I won't run. Not from you, not from the hard days, not from the truths we carry. I choose you, always, even when it's quiet, even when it's hard." Amelia's voice trembled, but her gaze never wavered. "I used to believe I had to stand alone to be strong," she said. "But I've learned that true strength is in allowing someone to see the parts of you that aren't finished yet. You've seen me, Nathan, all of me, and you stayed. So today, I'm not promising perfection, I'm promising presence. I'm here, with you, for all of it." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Maria, seated with Theo at her feet, dabbed at her cheek with a handkerchief embroidered with tiny lemons, a nod to Amelia's childhood. They were pronounced husband and wife, not with fanfare, but with quiet applause, with birds singing from the trees and wind rustling the vines. Later that afternoon, under a sky that had turned impossibly blue, guests gathered for a simple lunch beneath open tents. There were no place cards, no speeches choreographed for attention. Just laughter, clinking glasses, and stories passed between strangers who felt like old friends. Nathan took Amelia's hand and led her into the rows of vines, away from the crowd, toward the crest of the hill where they had once stood and watched, the land together when it was still wild and untamed. "It's all growing now," she said, her voice soft. "So are we," he replied. They sat beneath an old oak tree whose roots curved outward like arms embracing the soil. Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, her fingers lacing with his. "I used to think I was ruined," she whispered. "After Preston, after the headlines, after being humiliated in front of people I thought mattered." He turned toward her, lifting her chin gently. "You were never ruined. You were waiting." She smiled faintly. "For what?" "For a place to land. For someone who wouldn't be afraid of everything you carried." They sat in silence, watching the breeze ripple across the grass. In the distance, their guests laughed and toasted, unaware of the moment unfolding at the edge of the vineyard. Nathan pulled something from his pocket, a small brass key. "To the greenhouse," he said. "It's finished." She took it, eyes wide. "You finished it without me?" "No," he said, "I waited. But I wanted to give you a place that was fully yours, a space to grow things, to breathe." Amelia blinked back emotion. "You remembered." "Every word," he said. "Especially the ones you never said aloud." They returned to the celebration as dusk settled. Lanterns flickered along the garden paths, casting soft shadows on the stone. Someone began playing a cello near the vines, the music swelling with every turn of the bow. It wasn't a grand waltz. It was something slow, aching, and beautiful. Nathan extended a hand. "May I have this dance?" Amelia stepped into his arms, and under the twilight, in the middle of a garden they had chosen, two people who had once been strangers, drawn together by circumstance and pain, now moved together with rhythm and trust. They didn't speak of the beginning, of the scandal, of the night spent wondering whether any of this would last. They didn't have to, because in that moment, surrounded by everything they had planted with care, they knew love had not arrived perfectly, but it had arrived wholly, and it was enough.